Nearly 2.5 years following the release of the acclaimed and celebrated Shadowbringers, the constantly growing smash hit MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV is ready to bring its first entire story arc to a close with Endwalker. It's no doubt a long-awaited finish for those who have been playing since the early days of A Realm Reborn, and doubly so for those who were there to experience the notorious 1.0 version firsthand. As I stated in my 14 video detailing my journey through the game, I've only been a fully committed player since about a week prior to Shadowbringers' launch, but I promise you, I'm no less hyped up than those more experienced players for this narrative to reach a close. I've been living and breathing this game for the last 2 years, 5 months, and 14 days or so, and since the 5.3 update, it has firmly settled in its place as my favorite Final Fantasy and one of my favorite games of all time. It has been painfully clear to me that this is a game crafted with every ounce of love and care its developers can put forth, particularly since the release of Heavensward, which was the game's first expansion and the moment where 14 transitioned from being just a good MMO to a great Final Fantasy. It's a small yet important distinction to make. This change was kept up through Stormblood and the aforementioned Shadowbringers, which is considered by the community far and wide as the best expansion so far, and for good reason. In its glorious totality, including its first 3 expansions, Final Fantasy XIV is a lot. It's a competently made MMO with a vast library of content and straightforward combat that stays fairly close to genre traditions, while also standing on its own with increasingly complex and awesome mechanics as you progress through the main scenario and enter later expansion content. It's also a sincerely gripping fantasy story that features a veritable smorgasbord of multi-dimensional characters, fascinating settings, mature themes, and cathartic emotional payoff, breaking the egregious genre stereotype that MMOs care less about story and more about chaining players to daily grinds with the constant looming threat of a fear of missing out or falling behind on gear acquisition. Combine those attributes with gorgeous art direction and astounding music, and you've got yourself a true gem that sincerely feels like a once-in-a-lifetime creation. Final Fantasy XIV has earned the reputation it currently has as a top-tier experience not only as an MMO, but as a video game, period. And it's through no lack of time and effort that this was achieved. Naoki Yoshida and his team of talented and driven individuals have created something special. And without mincing words, Endwalker's duty to bring this story to a close has a lot riding on it. Following the highly acclaimed and beloved penultimate expansion of Shadowbringers, this final chapter has big shoes to fill and a high standard to reach. So, does it succeed? Let's find out. Now, before we properly dive into the review, I want to give a quick disclaimer. This video will be divided into 2 types of reviews, a non-spoiler review and a spoiler-filled discussion. Reason being, this game is still rising in popularity and I want to be able to talk about this expansion without necessarily diving into any sensitive plot details for the benefit of those who are curious of its quality but don't want to be spoiled. I will name things that have been shown off in stuff like the live letters leading up to launch. So if you're looking for a true, totally spoiler-free review that doesn't have any proper nouns at all, you'll have to go somewhere else. Now, additionally, there's also the simple fact that Endwalker is the final expansion for the game's first story arc, and it's really difficult to go into truly meaningful detail without stepping on something that someone might consider spoilery. So, here's how this video is going to work out. The non-spoiler review will come first, and I will discuss the game in very general terms while only naming things that have been shown off before in promotional material and live letters, and vaguely touch on certain unnamed specifics, and the gameplay footage I'll use on screen will be early game areas only. It won't be a very long review, but I will try as hard as I can to get my point across. After that, the spoiler-filled story discussion begins, and I will go into shameless detail about major plot points that I want to talk about, because there are many. It's the final chapter of this game's first story arc, and a ton of interesting things happen, and I want to talk about them. Plain and simple. If you're here only for the non-spoiler review, then watch that, and then close the video. If you're here for the spoiler-filled discussion, then watch both parts, because I don't want to repeat anything I said in the non-spoiler section. That does it for the layout of the video. Did you get all that? Good. Now, without any more stalling, let's get started. Endwalker takes place immediately following the events of Shadowbringers, as you can doubtlessly surmise on your own. The Warrior of Light and the Scions have returned from the First and are now setting out to deal with another threat that seeks to destroy their world by way of bringing about an unstoppable apocalypse that had occurred once before on a different planet long, long ago. Their efforts bring them to Old Sharlayan, a city of scholars and researchers mentioned on occasion throughout the MSQ at the very beginning of the expansion, which is to act as the new hub city. It is a beautiful and riveting new location that honestly kind of feels like a much more expanded and fully realized Idleshire, which would be pretty accurate lore-wise, I guess. It's clear from the get-go that this is a city that values knowledge. It has a gigantic library featuring a nigh uncountable amount of books, some merchants, and a cafe, a dormitory where the player will be spending a lot of time discussing plans, a lush field for relaxation, and a large meeting hall where all 99 members of the leading body, the Forum, congregate for discussion and debate. Basically, Old Sharlayan is a college campus. Either way, it's a gorgeous place with a pleasant seaside atmosphere and well-placed aetherytes, which are now made even more useful thanks to the updated aetheryte map that now shows exactly where a highlighted destination is. A small but great quality of life change. There's also the addition of the follow mechanic, where other characters will physically travel with you on certain quests, walking or running by your side to the next checkpoint. It's a small mechanic, but it really makes this feel like a Final Fantasy game. Below Old Sharlayan is the first large open area where you can explore, Labyrinthos, which is essentially a gargantuan underground storage area for flora and fauna being researched by Sharlayan scholars. It's not some dingy, dank cavern or something, but a massive biodome with its own artificial sky, weather, and sun. It's an incredible marvel of in-universe science and magic, and just a beautiful locale in general, with its many lush green patches of earth and scattered spots of Sharlayan architecture. And yes, ether currents are back, of course, and are still required to unlock flying. However, in my time through the MSQ, I didn't really bother getting them, which did not make traversal a chore, because Quest did an excellent job of bringing you from spot to spot throughout the map. Riding my mount for fairly significant distances never felt like a chore as it did in previous expansions, particularly in areas that sorely lacked in multiple teleportable aetherytes. In Endwalker, every area has 3 or 4 large aetherytes to attune and fast travel to, and it makes things more convenient. Another major city introduced with Endwalker is Radz-at-Han, located in Thavnair, which is an area you reach very early on. In fact, you can choose to go there before you finish doing all the important stuff at Sharlayan. Radz-at-Han and the Thavnair area at large really is a vibrant, colorful setting, bursting with every color of the rainbow. Honestly, as much as I love the cities and environments of this game, this is probably the first area, at least in the source, our homeworld, to truly make me feel like I was in a foreign land. It is absolutely incredible. And then there was Garlemald, a frigid, snow-ravaged land that probably shouldn't be supporting any life at all, capped off with destroyed buildings and the most blatantly evil-looking tower settled on the horizon, looming over everyone with its nasty, foreboding aura. It's a dreary place, but not necessarily a boring one. It has a very distinct atmosphere and features its own type of beauty within its dismal appearance. And the last area that I'll be mentioning, though not the last area in the expansion, is Mare Lamentorum, or simply, the Moon. This one's not a spoiler simply by virtue of being at the center of every piece of Endwalker promotional material, including the expansion's own damn logo. It's near impossible to not know about it if you've been playing this game at all for the last several months. Now, the moon is just gorgeous, and in a way that the other areas don't touch. I'm tempted to go into more detail, but this gameplay footage will have to do. I don't want to push the boundaries of what's considered a non-spoiler too much. Then there's dungeons. Generally speaking, I found all of them to be very engrossing, not just combat and mechanics-wise, but in atmosphere and background details. I'm only going to use gameplay footage of the first dungeon in the expansion for this spoiler-free section, because I honestly can't go into any detail for later dungeons, because they become far more story-sensitive with each consecutive one. But overall, I really enjoyed them. The map designs were cool, especially one area in a later dungeon that has almost certainly the most jaw-dropping aesthetic in the entire game. The immersion was incredible, and bosses were really fun and boasted some cool mechanics. Then there's Trials, which I can't talk about at all. In fact, I can't even give you footage of the first trial like I am with Dungeons, because even that is rife with spoilers, especially the fact that it's the first trial. However, I will say, like with previous expansions, there are a total of 3, and I greatly enjoyed them all as well. All 3 trials were immense fun, mechanically interesting, visually spectacular, musically immaculate, and fulfilling on a personal level due to their intimate ties with the crux of the game's story. Quite frankly, Endwalker may have my most favorite collection of duties out of all 4 released expansions. I'm not 100% willing to commit to that comment yet, but it's how my gut feels at this moment. The story of Endwalker is where this non-spoiler section of the review becomes somewhat difficult. Aside from only the most basic plot summary, there's little else I can add without running the risk of putting at least a single toe over the line of what you may consider spoilers. And some of you may have stricter or more lax qualifications for what constitutes a spoiler to begin with. Maybe one of you watching this considers even knowing the names of the areas already mentioned in past live letters to be spoilers. But then again, I don't know why you would be watching this video at all instead of going into a full media blackout. But I digress. Without divulging anything crucial, my thoughts on the story of Endwalker are as follows. It's incredible. It's deeply fulfilling, rewarding, complex, and surprising. And long. Very long. If I recall correctly, Yoshi P stated at one point that Endwalker's script was about 50% longer than Shadowbringers, and I completely believe that. Because as I was barreling through the MSQ, paying no attention to anything else, it seemed like for every hour I was actually playing, I watched an hour and a half of cutscenes. And that's not a complaint. On the contrary, it actually helped drive the point home that this is truly the end. There are a few sparse points that I felt dragged a tiny bit, but this is the finale of an 8-year-long story, and it needed as much attention and depth as the writing team could give. I'm glad we got such a dense narrative. It's a story that constantly gives us new things to be excited for, as well as more gratification for being faithful, dedicated players. It's as emotionally resonant as any of the past expansions, perhaps even more so to some of those who have also finished it. Shadowbringers was, to an extent, a culmination of our journey up to that point, but Endwalker kicks that up to 11. People, places, and plot devices from the past return in big ways that we don't expect. Even old contrivances that you might have deemed odd or out of place years ago are addressed or resolved. It's quality long-form writing of the highest degree. It might be tough to call it a step up from Shadowbringers because it's an alarmingly tough act to follow, but I'll be damned if it's not close. In fact, I'd say one of the more brilliant things Endwalker manages to accomplish isn't simply being incredible in its own right, but making Shadowbringers even better retroactively. It's insane. And then there's the score. Man oh man, Soken really fucking outdid himself. Endwalker is absolutely loaded with fantastic pieces, and he once again flexes his absolute mastery of leitmotifs. Soken truly excels at his craft, and he knows exactly how to manipulate or amplify the emotions of a scene or a fight with his immaculate tunes. Whether you're exploring the open world or doing a duty, there's always something good to listen to, and those that feature lyrics are thematically relevant and emotionally impactful. I can't even begin to count how many times the music of this game has elevated the personal gratification felt in scenes. And then there's the two new jobs, Sage and Reaper. I have not touched either yet because I am very content as a samurai, and I didn't want to contribute to the massive tidal wave of new Sages or Reapers who might perform poorly in duties. That being said, I am interested in Reaper and will eventually check it out. I'm not very interested in being a healer, so I'm probably gonna have to pass on Sage. And to close out the spoiler-free review of this video, I do also wish to touch on server performance and long queues, which is an issue that is ongoing as of writing this video. In fact, as I record my narration right now, Square Enix straight up removed the game from purchase on digital storefronts because of the consistent congestion. The game is literally too successful. During the initial period of Endwalker's so-called early access release though, it was indeed absolute hell to get into the game. My own home server isn't even in the top 10 most populated, as far as I've been able to check, but I still had to wait up to 40 minutes before getting in, and that's assuming I wasn't booted out of the queue by a 2002 error and unable to get my place back. That did happen, but only once, thank God. Luckily, the game performed perfectly fine once I did manage to start playing. It was as smooth as it could be. Yoshi P and team were since able to alleviate the server congestion to an extent by temporarily surrendering developer servers over to public use, which is unheard of as far as I'm aware. As hectic as those first few days were, I'm glad the team was transparent and proactive in trying to help. But it seems that the problem continues to persist. Endwalker is, unironically, too prosperous for its own good, and the only solution is more servers. But those are impossible to acquire due to the chip shortage interfering with every facet of the tech industry. Apparently, users discovered that the 2002 error is an issue that dates back to 1.0, and the team is working on a solution to further relieve everyone's login burdens. So, to summarize my fairly brief non-spoiler review, I think Endwalker has fantastic new locales, entertaining and immersive new duties, and obviously a highly impactful, fulfilling, and cathartic story to cap off the game's Hydaelyn Zodiac narrative. If you were to ask me if I think Endwalker is better than Shadowbringers, which is remarkable in itself, I think my gut feeling would be to lean towards yes, as surprising as that may sound. But even if you walk away disagreeing a bit with that statement, it's undoubtedly still a magnificent close to this 8-year-long story. With all that said, it's now time to move on to my spoiler-filled story discussion, where I will go into detail about heavy plot points. I'm pulling no punches here. I will talk about every big, noteworthy scene and duty that I wish to talk about, and leave out no details. So consider this your last warning. You are entering major spoiler territory, and venturing beyond this point of the video is of your own discretion. To prove that I'm not fucking around, I'm going to start off by saying, Thancred dies. Or does he? See, if you actually finished Endwalker, you would know if I'm telling the truth or not. That's the kind of shit that I'm going to get into. No holds barred, no walking on eggshells. If that's not what you want, then go away. After multiple warnings, I will not be taking responsibility for your anger if I say something that you don't want to hear. Now, for the rest of you, let's get into our spoiler-filled discussion. In case you skipped the spoiler-free review before this to come straight to the discussion, don't. Go back and watch it, because I won't be repeating the things I said there, here. To make things easy, I'm going to touch on events in order, as you come across them while playing. When the expansion first begins, the Scions immediately board the ship to Old Sharlayan, which has a couple of nice surprises in itself. First is Hoary Boulder and Coltene appearing and being voiced for the first time since post-ARR, I think. It's a small thing, but I'm glad we get to hear them speak after so long. The shipwright also had a pleasantly unexpected physical appearance of Hydaelyn, which I wasn't anticipating so early on. One of the dialogue choices you can pick is voicing your distrust, which I think is a sly way to fool the player into further thinking that she might be up to no good, seeing as how she's simply a very powerful primal. It's a very conscious acknowledgement of what the player might be considering and plays on their expectations. Once we reach Old Sharlayan, there's no shortage of scenes featuring comedic relief, idle banter, and serious discussion between the Scions. If there's one thing I'll never complain about in this game, it's all the fantastic dialogue between all the major characters. Another thing I appreciate about Sharlayan is the forum. It was probably widely expected, and could have been very easy, for them to have been written in a way that makes them seem like a group of willingly out of touch or apathetic and stern old codgers. But Ishikawa took the high road and ultimately made them aware of the overarching issue and take active measures in avoiding calamity in their own way, which ends up helping our crew. It was very interesting how it was revealed early on that the forum's predecessors discovered something in the ethereal sea so important that they spend the next 300 years with a laser focus on it. Furthermore, it was really nice to finally meet the twins' mother, Emilience. I knew it was inevitable that we'd meet her, but it was nice to receive a character who was so nonchalantly dismissive of the whole disownership ordeal and still openly love her children regardless and provide them gifts for their coming journey. I really like her. Then we went to Thavnair, and I must say, I really love the method of travel, which is experimental aetheryte teleportation without attunement, and the ensuing scenes involving Estinian's bad spending habits. It was very amusing and gave Estinian a more comedic side without making him look any less of a badass. Meeting Matsya was great, and selling fish to help him become a better salesman was a nice way of introducing him, even if I only sold one fish. Meeting Nidana and other alchemists was also a great scene, including the introduction of the suspicious Varshan, who is soon revealed to be a simulacrum created to allow the real satrap of Thavnair, the dragon Vritra, to have a closer and more involving eye on his people. It was a cool reveal. We already knew from the cinematic movie that Vritra was going to show up eventually, but this was a neat way to do it. Fandaniel revealing himself to have lived as Amon in the previous life was fucking mind-blowing. I truly didn't expect it. And it seems like something that might not make sense, but it ultimately fits in the story pretty well. Doing Circus Tower in the Alliance Raid Roulette is going to hit very differently from now on. The Tower of Zot's bosses being the Magus Sisters is also really cool. It's always nice to see veteran franchise summons coming back as bosses in this game. The introduction of Dynamis or Akasha is also an interesting one, a type of energy that is actually in greater abundance around us than ether, but cannot be manipulated. If the creation of such a concept for the game were any less delicate, it would feel very contrived, but it was implemented without butting heads with much of anything. In fact, it's now the canon reason as to why limit breaks are possible. The first scene to truly have me both in awe and gleeful due to its fan service was the first of what I like to call all the warriors scenes, where past characters who might have been absent for some time, perhaps even since A Realm Reborn content, make their way back in front of the camera to help the main character. The first of this was in Alamigo, where the Ilsabard contingent was being created to save the Garleans from tempering by the towers. And man, it was so good to see all of my old Job Quest buddies together in one room. I only ever leveled up jobs to begin with to just pass the time, but Yoshi P and Ishikawa went out of their way to give players like me a real reward in this scene. It was so cool. I only wish Gaius had a bigger part, but given the explanation he had for being distant from the plan, I can understand his muted involvement in the story. And while I know that Hien and Yugiri are included in the Endwalker job quest for physical ranged players, I do wish they had a bigger role here in the MSQ. Heading to Garlemald was incredible. especially with all the multiple single-player instances, one where you sneak around as Thangred to sabotage a base of tempered soldiers, and then you go back to playing as the Warrior of Light to defend the convoy with the Warriors of the Azim Steppe. If there's any criticism I have of the Garlemald portion of the game, it's perhaps it doesn't do enough to remind players that the Garlean Empire had their own fair share of suffering at the hands of others before turning into the villains that Eorzea perceives them as. People who are really in tune with the story and lore will know their history of being cast out of their original homes and persecuted for being non-magical, but for others, it might not be at the front of their minds throughout this section. The whole sequence where Xenos steals your body and threatens to kill people as you was the first really tense moment in the expansion for me. I was actually feeling really desperate to stop him. The Tower of Babel dungeon was really cool, particularly for the final boss, Anima, probably my favorite summon monster in the entire franchise. I was really hyped up when it was first revealed to be part of the expansion, but I didn't anticipate it being the twisted icon of Emperor Varus. It was a super cool fight, and I kinda wish it was a trial instead, if I'm being honest. Following the dungeon, we go to the fucking moon. Way earlier than I anticipated, and it's here where things are crazier than we assumed they'd be. And it's made very obvious due to the fact that we fight and kill Zodiark less than halfway into this expansion. That was a major holy shit realization because it struck me that almost everyone we anticipated to be the major antagonists of Endwalker were just red herrings. Fandaniel, Zodiark, Xenos, none of them were the true big bads, and shit was about to go down for real. The Loperids were also very nice, and I enjoyed the giant ship area where they all lived. I do kind of feel like their questline ran a little long, but maybe that's just me trying to get through the expansion in one weekend. At some points, it did feel a bit like a filler arc you would have in an anime or something, but obviously, considering how the story ends, it would be ill-fitting to have this anywhere else, so it's ultimately fine. Finally, after returning home, things truly become dire. The final days actually begin, starting with Thavnair. We head back there and it's sheer chaos. The next dungeon, Vanaspati, is unlocked soon after our arrival, and it's a very dark and atmospheric duty where fires rage throughout the surrounding forest, and many NPCs suffer the gruesome fate of turning into savage beasts that have to be put down. It's reminiscent of Holminster's Switch in Shadowbringers in that way. Much to my surprise, I actually got the baby hippo minion on my first trek through there. He's very adorable. After that, we return to Radzat Han, where an absolutely fucking horrific scene happens where people start to transform within the city walls. A child is turned right in front of his father's eyes before being unceremoniously crushed to death by a larger beast. Quite possibly the most gruesome child death any game could possibly conceive without getting hit with at least an M rating. Then Ahawan is eaten while trying to protect the father. It's just a nasty, nasty sequence that really drives home how catastrophic the situation is. Immediately after that, you go on a search for a man's wife and child, only to witness the woman killed and the baby barely escaping death. But then, Matsya carries the baby to safety and the baby almost turns. Then Matsya almost turns. It was, without any hesitation on my part here, one of the most tense moments I've seen in a game in a long, long time. It's hard to talk during the whole scene because I'm too busy trying to not to cry from all the pressure I'm feeling. When Estinian and Vritra save the day and the tension is loosened, I wanted to burst into tears because it felt like a boulder just lifted off my shoulders. We just finished watching another child get killed, alongside another side character, so it was very easy to think Matsya and the baby would meet the same fate. Then we revisit the first, and see our friends from Shadowbringers in an official capacity again, meaning we actually get an update as to how they've been living the past however long. But we also go to the Crystal Tower there to meet with what remains of Elidibus's form. He uses the last of his power to send us back in time to the days of the Ancients/Amerodians, and we finally see that they have normal human forms. Our time traveling happens under the pretense that we'll likely be too weak in our etheric composition to really do anything of consequence over there. However, we soon meet up with our good pal Emmet Selk and Hythlodaeus, who is very hot. Together, they give us a bit of etheric power to make us normal again, or at least as normal as we can be given the circumstances, and we enter Elpis, an absolutely jaw-dropping area that breathes so much life into what we know about the ancients and their studies. There, we meet Hermes, who is the original soul of who we currently know as Fandaniel, and one of his creations, Meteon, a cute little bird girl who has the power to communicate through emotion, as well as absorb the emotion of others and project her own. Basically, she's a super powerful empath who has the ability to manipulate dynamis, that energy that's controlled by emotion. And little do we know when we first meet her, she is the game's final boss. It's typically a really ballsy move to introduce a true big bad so close to the end, and this could have easily been fumbled, but Endwalker does an excellent job of justifying her existence, because at the end of the day, you can't fight the final days if it's just a faceless abstract force with no physical manifestation. You need a face to your evil, or the whole endgame conflict just feels sloppy and unfulfilling. Oh, and we also meet Fanat, who later becomes Hydaelyn, and she was the previous holder of the Azem name before giving it over to who would eventually be us, so to speak. Also, it's confirmed that the spell that allows those with the Echo to avoid enthrallment by primals is indeed just a regular spell, not the effect of being enthralled by Hydaelyn herself, as a popular theory might have suggested. Ishikawa is spitting on your fan theories. This entire portion of the story culminates at the point where it's basically revealed that you do have the power to change things, unlike Elidibus's warning. It's just that Hermes used Kairos to memory wipe himself, Hythlodaeus, and Emet-Selch. Tough deal. But more importantly, Meteon's transformation into the villain occurs. After an annoyingly long series of chase objectives, Hermes created more than one of her and sent them all out into the stars to find other intelligent life, giving them a shared consciousness to help report their discoveries. Sadly, all the media could find were civilizations that had recently fell and gone extinct, or were currently in the process of becoming extinct, usually by a cause of their own making. On some rare occasions, the arrival of a Meteon herself would accidentally spark a conflict that led to the civilization to doom. Two planets that stood out to me the most were the one where the population successfully eliminated the ability to feel sorrow, but they couldn't savor happiness in contrast, leading them to wish for death, and the planet that flourished under an actual physical god who then killed everyone in a fit of rage, later killing itself when one of the media asked why they did that. Basically, this group of super powerful empaths spend many years absorbing the hopelessness and sorrow of a countless number of worlds on the brink of total doom, ultimately turning them into despair incarnate. Because of this, Meteon deduces that the meaning of life is to simply die, as it is an unavoidable outcome in the grand scheme of things. It's a bit more nuanced than I've explained it, but that's basically the gist. What really struck me about Meteon's character is the small bursts of weird, cosmic horror as she slowly begins to turn evil. It's an unsettling tone shift that is expertly executed. And Fanat, Emet-Selch, and Hythlodaeus being the trust NPCs for the dungeon of that area is also really fucking cool. I wasn't expecting that, even though it should have been obvious, I guess. Then we head back to Garlemald, where the final days has spread to, and have yet another run-in with Xenos, who is basically told to fuck off because the Warrior of Light is too busy with actual important shit to indulge him in a random fight to the death. This is, unironically, the best way for the narrative to address him, in addition to Xenos himself being perceptive enough to know that a fight wouldn't be fulfilling if we were too distracted by something else. However, the battle-sexual former prince had a pretty good monologue where he asked if Euless would be happier if Xenos had a good reason for engaging in indiscriminate killing. It's funny because it feels like he's speaking directly to people who adore Emet-Selch, who is undeniably a mass genocider, but a lot of the community like him anyway because he talks funny and has a reason for committing genocide that we more or less approve of due to him having a tragic backstory. Pretty meta. Then we head back to Sharlayan and prepare to stuff everyone's asses onto that ship the Forum is building so we can get to the moon. This series of quests is another that might feel like a bit of a slog, especially one in particular where you have to search a massive area for 8 specific NPCs, but it contains a very emotional scene of Urianger finally talking with Monbrida's parents in person. Then another All the Warriors scene happens when a ton of side characters we've met throughout our journey show up at Sharlayan's harbor to provide materials to be used for completing the arc. It's another hype moment that almost brings a tear to mine eye in reminiscence of how far the journey has taken me. The scene even includes characters you meet during the Alliance Raid stories, such as the City of Mach quest for Heavensward and the Evilise quest for Stormblood. Eventually, we hit the level 89 dungeon and trial, and god damn, they are doozies. The dungeon is set within the Ethereal Sea, where the remnants of the dead drift in their form of an afterlife, both allies and enemies alike, and thus, both sides make an appearance here. Ilberd takes the form of an enemy, but is brought down by a remnant of Papalimo, and the souls of Monbrida, Horshafont, and Minfilia offer further assistance. The first 2 bosses are Livia and Ratatan, Gaius's former subordinates, but malformed into great beasts due to the lingering emotions they feel about their life. The final boss was Amon, and this was where the final ally appeared, Isael, in her Shiva form to provide the protection of a giant glacier from Curtain Call, a throwback to the move Amon also uses in Circus Tower. It's a beautiful dungeon both visually and content-wise. I'll never not be hit deep in the chest by references to our fallen friends. I will always catch feelings for it. The trial, however, is just a whole nother level. It goes above and beyond an emotional payoff, as this time the opponent is Heidelin herself. Not a shade, not a copy, not a mimic. The real deal. And god damn is she gorgeous and also blatantly transitioned from Yoshitaka Amano art. If you're familiar with the man's style, and many of you general Final Fantasy fans damn well should be, then you can tell just by her face and eyes that the modelers who worked on her simply took some kind of Amano artwork and made it 3D. It's uncanny. Furthermore, this is the first and only trial in the entire game where trust NPCs can be used in lieu of real players. And you damn well better believe that I went with those NPCs. I don't care who you are, that is the only way to properly play this trial for the first time. I don't want any excuses. None. And it was a great fight in every respect. Really fun, great music, and fulfilling in every way that matters. After that, we enter the final stretch. The end of Endwalker is now in sight. We put our asses onto that arc, which has been repurposed to reach the edge of the universe, and we set off to finally confront Meteon. There's a scene where representatives from every single beast tribe show up to offer their support by summoning the proper, benevolent versions of their gods to assist in giving the arc enough power to go into space. And it is badass. I consider it yet another All the Warriors scene. We got Ifrit, Leviathan, Ravana, King Mughal Bismarck, a very unhappy Garuda, and my personal favorite, a very jolly and rejoiceful Susano, and everyone else. It was an amazing way to include the primals/summons again for one last hurrah. After everyone reaches space, Meteon appears, says some creepy things before knocking everyone out, except Thancred, who disappears, and we arrive at our final destination, Ultima Thule. It's a very fascinating area that is chock full of interesting lore, particularly information pertaining to other worlds that Meteon witnessed the downfall of. It's parted into several sections, and each section covers one civilization and ends with 1 or 2 party members sacrificing themselves so the others can continue. The first part is the world of dragons, the former home of Midgardsormr and his yet unborn brood. It was turned into a wasteland due to their conflict with mechanical invaders, and the war left their planet so torn and desolate that not even new life could be born. This is made worse when their enemies deemed their planet unworthy of looting for resources, meaning the war happened for basically no reason at all. The second area is a world inhabited by the Ea, a race of ghost-like intelligent creatures who were so smart they managed to shed their mortal forms, but they sought death when they discovered that the end of the universe was inevitable and unavoidable. The third world is that of the Omicrons, the mechanical beings that fought the dragons. They're the most fascinating in my opinion, as they initially had feeble biological bodies, but used mechanical enhancements to make themselves stronger. They purposefully invaded other planets using preemptive self-defense as an excuse because they were paranoid of being conquered, and thus became conquerors themselves. With every civilization they decimated, they made themselves stronger, until the leader, Stigma 1, realized that there was no one left, no other potential enemy to lash out at. It realized that the Omicrons didn't invade other worlds as self-defense, but to unwittingly engage in avoidable, needless, wanton destruction. Thus, they simply idled until their energy reserves ran out, and they all perished with time, defeated by their own limited scope on the purpose of their existence. The final area is a bit of a puzzle, as it's not inhabited by anyone. It's implied that it was normal until literally everybody vanished into thin air in an instant. However, Medion was the key to unlocking the path forward, and the twins were the only ones left to sacrifice themselves so the Warrior of Light could continue on. And we did. The final approach to the final mission of the game is gut-wrenching. The game forces you to do nothing but walk forward, approaching ghostly representatives of your past, your adventure, all the way up until this point. The voices of Americ, Nanamo, Horshafant, Raubon, Hien, Minfilia, Midgardstormer, Ardbert, and more push you forward. It's an encouraging yet heart-rending few moments, and extremely difficult to play through with composure, but god damn was it incredible. It's an earned moment. The story deserved an opportunity to do something this sentimental. If this game had worse characters and worse writing, it would have fallen flat. But it didn't. It hits, and it hits hard. Once the walk to the end is finished, we manage to summon our friends Emet-Selch and Hythlodaeus, who allow us to bring back our Scion buddies. Emet-Selch goes into a bit of a monologue that's basically Yoshi-P himself telling us where we'll be going in future expansions, because there's still a lot of places on our own home planet we haven't been to. And then, the final quest begins proper, with another dungeon and trial combo, and holy shit, these are just as amazing as the last. The dungeon is called The Dead Ends, and they are memories of worlds on their last days before doom. The first is an aquatic land infested with a disgusting rot that infected and killed all life. If you like Berserk, the environment will probably look familiar to you. The second world is one where war and weapons of mass destruction decimated everyone. And if you read the tiny bits of lore scattered about, it seems to imply that Medion's arrival is what sparked the conflict. The third world is one that I've mentioned before, where sorrow was eliminated, which in turn rendered happiness meaningless, and the population summoned a god to mercifully kill everyone. And this area in particular is probably the most awe-striking one in the whole damn game. More cutscenes play out afterward, and Medion finally transforms to become the true final boss of Final Fantasy XIV, the Endsinger. Yet another awesome boss design with a very blatant Amano-style face. The Scions get into a bit of trouble, and our Warrior of Light, thinking fast, teleports them out of harm's way, but leaves themselves alone to fight the physical incarnation of despair and hopelessness. Until probably the coolest and strangest surprise of this whole expansion, Xenos literally breaks into the area in the form of Shinryu, and helps out by letting you ride him as a platform you'll be using to fight the Endsinger in the obligatory trial. The crazy, obsessive, battle-sexual madman did it. I can't believe I popped off so hard for Xenos of all people. The fight itself is incredible, and the background is appropriately spacey and cool, considering we're at the edge of the universe. There's mechanics in the battle that can be weird to get used to, like the big planet colliding AoE, and many telegraphs for other AoEs take place off the platform or on the Endsinger's very model, which I think seems to be a pattern that more trials, and bosses in general really, are adopting as time goes on. Sometimes I find them kind of annoying, but this one does it very well. After defeating the Endsinger, we officially complete Endwalker. Mostly. Meteon is able to reflect on her actions and learn that mankind has more to do and feel than just throw themselves into the cold embrace of despair. And Xenos finally gets the one-on-one he's been searching for. I don't care who you are or what kind of warrior of light you've been playing as. Choosing that I can't deny when Xenos says you're an adventurer who lives for the thrill is the best response, because he's right. Xenos, ironically, is one of the few characters in this expansion who knew exactly what kind of person he was and what he lived for. One of the few characters who could have sincerely given his own honest answer to Hermes' question of what gives life meaning. And by that stretch of reason, he also knew us, the players. He knew that we were into the life of adventure for the danger, the discovery, the emotion, and in many cases, also the challenge. If that weren't true, we wouldn't have played through hundreds of hours of MSQ content. After giving your response, the final duel begins. You versus Xenos at the literal edge of creation. A one-on-one single-player instance happens, and you're given a buff that allows you to revive several times before losing the fight, likely meant to not suck out the momentum of the ending. Xenos throws everything he has at you across 2 phases, but after the fight is over, there's a short bout of fisticuffs, just a raw, winner-take-all slugfest between 2 foes, and you finally finish him off for good. Then we head back to the ship, fly back home, everyone's happy and reunited, and the credits roll, for a good while at that. I think if you let the credits play at normal speed all the way through, it's about 35 minutes or something. And rightfully so. When the credits are over, Alpha Note states that the Scions are disbanding, at least publicly. They're still ready to come back together in case they're needed, but for the foreseeable future, which won't be very long I'm sure, they're now splitting up to do their own thing. And with that, Endwalker truly finishes. And your last rewards for completing the mission are the Argos mount and a wind-up minion of Venat. And there's also a post-credits teaser of Elidibus mentioning Pandemonium, the upcoming raid series. Whew. That concludes my spoiler-filled story discussion. Endwalker is just a grand journey that is rife with content, and not just playable content either. Yes, there is fantastic areas, dungeons, and trials, but the narrative is also dense with detail, development, surprises, and emotion. There's a lot of room to argue that Shadowbringers is superior as a one-off story, and I might even be inclined to agree. But, as the finale to an overarching story that's been winding up for 8 years, 10 if you include 1.0, it's hard to get any better than this. Endwalker represents the triumph of long-form storytelling in games and how a conclusion can truly cement a journey as a classic so long as it sticks the landing. In that way, Endwalker was important. It was paramount for this expansion to hit a home run. All too often do we see the steam of a great long-form story run out, leaving the experience to wither into nothing because the ending was flaccid and unmemorable, or just plain nonsense. But that doesn't happen here. Endwalker covers a spectrum of themes dedicated to the concept of hope, and how we interpret it and live by it. To live is to suffer, but it's the drive for something better that keeps us pushing on. It's an idea that isn't special or unique to just this game, but in Endwalker, it feels like it comes from a personal place. Yoshi P, Ishikawa, and the entire team at Square's Creative Business Unit 3 crafted a sincerely remarkable experience that could have scarcely been improved upon. They had up to a decade's worth of weight and expectations to live up to, and they succeeded. All that's left now is to speculate on where the future will lead us in regard to our next big adventure. Emmett Selk already told us, practically looking at the camera, of all the other lands in our homeworld that we could see. But what's going to take us to those places? What new monsters will we face? What new allies will we meet? As of right now, we have the raid series Pandemonium to look forward to, but we don't yet know how that'll tie into the story. Usually it's the post-expansion updates that truly finish a story arc, but that's not going to happen here, because 6.0 is the end. There's nothing left to finish Endwalker's tale. Instead, there will only be build-up to our next journey. And according to Yoshi P himself, he and his team have planned out the next 10 years of content, so we're in it for the long haul yet again. We have a lot to look forward to, and I can only pray that it's as good as what we've already gotten. If it's somehow even better, I don't even know how I could handle it. But either way, I have my eyes cast toward the future. This has been my review and story discussion of Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in Eorzea.